At 37,000 feet, when you hear the sound of metal snapping followed by 3 different alarms going off simultaneously, you know your night just got a whole lot more complicated. And that particular night would forever change my perspective on what it means to be responsible for 165 lives that trust your competence blindly. My name is James. I've been a Boeing 737-800 captain for 15 years, and that Tuesday in September that started like any other. I was conducting what I thought was just another routine flight, or at least that's what I believed when I signed the dispatch papers in the briefing room at 9:30 p.m. We took off from the international airport at 10:15 p.m., bound for a state capital, carrying 165 passengers and a crew of 6 experienced professionals. It was one of those seemingly quiet September nights, when summer was giving way to fall, and you could even relax a bit at the controls, watching the city lights below like tiny diamonds scattered across the dark velvet of the American night. My first officer, Mike, had been flying with me for 2 years, a competent 32-year-old professional, graduate of the country's finest aviation academy, whom I trusted completely. We'd flown together over 200 hours, and I knew his work style like an open book. Our cabin crew was equally experienced, led by Chief Flight Attendant Sarah, a 38-year-old woman who'd been flying for over a decade and knew every detail of the 737 like the back of her hand. Completing the team were flight attendants Jennifer and Ashley, both with over 5 years with the company, and flight attendant David, who despite being young, already demonstrated the maturity necessary to handle adverse situations. The flight was scheduled to last just 1 hour and 40 minutes, a route I'd literally flown hundreds of times throughout my career, practically with my eyes closed. It was such a familiar route that I could anticipate every geographical landmark, every frequency change with control, every standard procedure we'd execute during the entire journey. The weather was within acceptable parameters for takeoff, though the meteorological report indicated possible isolated thunderstorm formation along the route, especially in the central region of the state. Nothing that concerned us much at that moment. After all, thunderstorms are part of the daily routine for any commercial pilot flying over American territory, especially during storm season. We had sufficient fuel for potential route deviations, plus regulatory reserves, and all aircraft systems were functioning perfectly during the meticulous pre-flight checks I always personally execute, no matter how many times I'd flown that same aircraft. We climbed smoothly through the low clouds covering the metropolitan area, reaching our cruise altitude of 37,000 feet without any noteworthy incidents. The passengers had already settled in for the night journey, some sleeping deeply after a day's work, others reading books or magazines under the soft light of individual lamps, a few still chatting quietly about the commitments awaiting them at their destination. The cabin service was proceeding normally, with the crew offering beverages and snacks with the efficiency and smile that characterize good service. I clearly remember thinking, while observing all instruments within normal parameters, that this would be one of those quiet nights when we arrive at destination even a bit ahead of schedule, allowing everyone to rest earlier. How completely wrong I was about what awaited us in the coming hours. We were about 50 minutes into the flight, cruising over a region of ranches and small towns whose lights dotted the darkness like terrestrial constellations, when we began approaching a denser cloud formation that stretched for dozens of miles ahead. The onboard weather radar showed some thunderstorm cells scattered across the region, but nothing that seemed particularly threatening or outside the normal pattern for that time of year and region. The colors on the radar varied between green and yellow, indicating moderate precipitation, with just a few isolated red spots that could be easily avoided with minor route adjustments. I requested from air traffic control a small heading change to avoid the most intense area, an absolutely routine procedure that any controller expects to receive dozens of times during a work shift. Control, requesting 10-degree right deviation to avoid precipitation area, I transmitted over the radio, following standard protocol. Approved right deviation, maintain altitude and report when clear of the area, came the immediate response from the controller, his calm and professional voice echoing through the headphones. It was when we entered the first cloud that things began to get interesting, though still within what we'd consider completely normal. The initial turbulence was moderate, the kind that makes passengers look at each other with that nervous smile that says, "Just a little bump." but doesn't worry experienced travelers or significantly disturb aircraft operation. The aircraft swayed gently, like a boat navigating medium swells, nothing that couldn't be easily compensated with small control adjustments. I instructed the cabin crew through the internal intercom to temporarily suspend cabin service and verify that all passengers had their seatbelts properly fastened, in addition to collecting and securing all loose objects that could become projectiles in case of more intense turbulence. It was standard protocol, a preventive measure we repeat hundreds of times throughout our careers, almost like an automatic reflex developed through years of experience and training. "Moderate turbulence, folks," I announced through the internal headphones. "Secure everything and prepare the cabin, should be brief." "Copy, Captain," Sarah responded with her always controlled voice. Cabin being secured. But then, in a split second that would completely change the course of that night, at exactly 37,000 feet altitude and flying at 480 knots, indicated airspeed, something happened that every pilot fears but hopes never to experience during an entire career. A dry, deep metallic noise, as if something fundamental and important had literally snapped inside the aircraft's guts, followed immediately by a terrifying sequence of audible and visual alarms that made my blood freeze instantly in my veins. The sound was unmistakable. That type of noise you learn to recognize during years of simulator training, but sincerely hope never to hear in a real situation. It was the sound of catastrophic system failure, accompanied by shrill alarms indicating complete loss of hydraulic pressure in the primary system. "Hydraulic system A lost," Mike announced immediately, reading the panels with the same precision and speed I was doing, his voice remaining professional despite the gravity of the situation. "Zero pressure, no return possible." In a matter of few seconds that felt like eternity, we lost control of vital aircraft components. Flaps, slats, main landing gear, primary brake system, and most critically, a large portion of the primary flight controls that make it possible to maneuver a 70-ton aircraft through the sky with precision and safety. The aircraft still responded to our commands through the secondary hydraulic system, but the indicators already showed worrying signs: unstable and constantly declining pressure, elevated temperature, and leak indications showing this system was also compromised. "Mike, immediately initiate emergency procedures for multiple hydraulic failure," I ordered, my voice automatically following protocols burned into memory through thousands of hours of training. "I'm going to assess the aircraft control situation. If you love real aviation stories, subscribe to Black Box so you don't miss any reports," I thought automatically, as if my brain was trying to find some familiar normalcy amid the chaos rapidly installing around us. The storm around us chose exactly that moment to intensify dramatically, as if nature was testing our ability to handle multiple simultaneous emergencies. Lightning cut through the night's darkness in all directions, illuminating dense clouds with white and blue flashes that transformed our cockpit into a sinister disco. The turbulence quickly escalated from moderate to severe, and our aircraft, already severely compromised by critical hydraulic problems, began to shake and vibrate in a way I'd never experienced in 15 years of commercial flying. It was like trying to maintain control of a wounded wild horse during an earthquake, with the difference that any error in judgment would result in the death of 171 people who completely trusted our professional competence. "Captain, the secondary system is showing increasing instability," Mike reported, constantly monitoring instruments while I fought to keep the aircraft level. "Pressure dropping gradually, temperature rising. We need to declare emergency immediately." "I completely agree. Contact air traffic control immediately and declare pan for multiple hydraulic system failure. Request direct vectors to the nearest alternate airport and authorization for emergency descent." While Mike established urgent contact with air traffic control, transmitting our critical situation with the precision and clarity the situation demanded, I concentrated totally on keeping the aircraft stable and controllable. Each control movement now required double the normal physical force, and I could clearly feel through the yoke and pedals that we were gradually losing command authority, minute by minute, as if the aircraft was slowly dying under our controls. The muscles in my arms were already beginning to ache from the constant effort needed to maintain level flight, and I knew that if the situation prolonged much longer, physical fatigue would become an additional limiting factor in our ability to control the aircraft safely. Control. This is aircraft in emergency. We declare pan-pan for multiple hydraulic system failure, requesting direct vectors to nearest alternate airport and immediate descent, Mike transmitted, with the firm voice the situation required. Aircraft in emergency. Pan-pan received. We're consulting available alternatives. Maintain altitude momentarily. Confirm souls on board and remaining fuel. 171 souls on board. Fuel for 2 more hours of flight, Mike responded, after quickly consulting the instruments. The controller offered us 2 options that presented distinct and equally concerning challenges. A medium-sized airport located 40 minutes flight time in our current condition, or trying to return to our departure airport, which was approximately 1 hour away. The decision had to be made quickly, and based on objective technical criteria, as our situation was continuously deteriorating, and each minute of delay reduced our available options. Mike, which airport has better emergency infrastructure and runway length? I asked while continuing to fight against controls that were becoming progressively heavier and less responsive. The nearest airport has a 2,800-meter runway, complete emergency services including fire and ambulance, but operates only with radio communication at night, no 24-hour control tower. The departure airport has complete infrastructure operating active tower, but that's 60 more minutes of flight, with unstable and deteriorating systems. The situation's math was simple and cruel. The longer we remained airborne with compromised hydraulic systems, the greater the probability of completely losing aircraft control before managing to land safely. On the other hand, the nearest airport presented its own significant operational challenges, especially considering we'd need precise communication with emergency services during final approach. We inform control we're opting for the nearest airport, I decided after quickly evaluating the pros and cons of each alternative. Mike, immediately initiate all emergency procedures for multiple hydraulic failure per the manual. I'm going to communicate the situation to passengers. I picked up the passenger cabin intercom and, making a conscious effort to keep my voice as calm and controlled as possible, made the announcement every captain hopes never to have to make during their career. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James speaking. We're experiencing a technical issue with the aircraft systems that requires us to make an unscheduled landing at the nearest airport as a precautionary measure. Please keep your seatbelts securely fastened and follow all instructions from our cabin crew. Our absolute priority is the safety of everyone aboard, and we're following all established procedures for this situation. What I deliberately didn't mention in the announcement was that, at that exact moment, our situation was becoming progressively more critical every second that passed, and the next 2 hours would be decisive in determining whether all of us would see the sunrise of that new day. The descent through the constantly intensifying storm was, without a doubt, the most challenging and terrifying experience of my entire 15-year career as a commercial pilot. With only the secondary hydraulic system functioning in an increasingly intermittent and unpredictable manner, every small course correction or altitude adjustment required extreme physical force on the controls, plus precise coordination between Mike and me to manage keeping the aircraft on a relatively stable trajectory. The aircraft responded to our commands with significant delay and growing imprecision, as if we were trying to pilot a wounded and reluctant animal that fought instinctively against our efforts to keep it on the correct path. Every control movement had to be anticipated and exaggerated to achieve the desired result, and even then, responses were inconsistent and sometimes counterproductive. At 15,000 feet altitude, during our emergency descent through rain-laden clouds and severe turbulence, what we most feared happened. We completely lost the secondary hydraulic system. Captain confirmed, we're in complete manual reversion, Mike announced, confirming with his tense but controlled voice what I could already feel dramatically through the controls. Total loss of hydraulic assistance in all systems. Now we could only control our 70-ton aircraft through pure physical force, without any hydraulic or electronic assistance, in a flight condition that few pilots experience during an entire career, and that would test all our years of training and accumulated experience. The airport was still 20 minutes flight time at our reduced speed, and we were descending painfully through a storm with crosswinds up to 80 kilometers per hour, practically zero visibility due to intense rain and low clouds, and an aircraft that barely responded to our desperate commands. It was literally like trying to draw artwork with a broken pencil during a magnitude 7 earthquake, knowing that any error would result in catastrophic consequences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Black Box channel for more real aviation stories, I thought once more, my mind automatically seeking anything familiar and comforting to maintain the focus and concentration needed amid the absolute chaos dominating our situation. At 8,000 feet, when we finally managed to exit the densest part of the storm, we could finally spot the saving lights of the airport in the distance, shining like a beacon of hope in the darkness of the rainy night. But our joy was quickly tempered by the cruel reality of our situation. Our approach speed was dangerously high. Without functional hydraulic systems, we couldn't adequately extend flaps or slats, essential components for reducing landing speed to safe levels. Mike, immediately calculate our estimated touchdown speed based on current aircraft configuration and reported wind conditions, I requested, while continuing to fight against controls to maintain our approach trajectory within marginally acceptable parameters. Captain, by my calculations, we're going to touch down on the runway at approximately 180 knots, at least 40 knots above normal landing speed for this aircraft and configuration, Mike responded, after several seconds of intense calculations. And the runway characteristics? What's the total available length? The runway is 2,800 meters long. Asphalt surface in good condition, but Captain, without functional brakes and with that excessive speed, Mike didn't need to complete the sentence for me to fully understand the mathematical gravity of our situation. We both knew it would be an extremely long landing, with real and significant risk of overrunning the end of the runway before managing to completely stop the aircraft. But the cruel reality was that we had absolutely no other viable option. It was our one and only chance to land safely and bring all passengers back to their families. Airport Tower, this is aircraft in emergency on final approach. We confirm critical situation with total hydraulic system failure. We request all available emergency vehicles be positioned immediately along the runway. We advise this will be a long landing. No operational brakes, elevated touchdown speed approximately 180 knots. Received and understood. Aircraft in emergency. Runway completely clear and isolated. Current winds 240 degrees, 25 knots steady, with gusts recorded up to 40 knots. All fire and ambulance units are positioned and on maximum alert. Good luck, Captain. The final 1,000 feet of descent were literally the longest and most agonizing of my entire professional life. The aircraft swayed violently in all directions due to intense crosswinds and residual turbulence from the storm, and I fought against the heavy controls with all the physical strength I could muster, with Mike assisting whenever necessary, applying additional force during the most critical moments of final approach. Touchdown on the runway occurred at 11:47 p.m. It was firm and controlled, firmer than I would have liked under normal conditions, but surprisingly controlled considering all the adversities we faced. The actual speed of 185 knots made our aircraft race down the runway like an uncontrolled projectile, and without functional brakes, our only realistic hope was that the available distance would be mathematically sufficient for us to stop before the runway's end through alternative braking methods. We utilized every emergency braking technique we'd learned and practiced during years of recurrent simulator training, but sincerely hoped never to have to apply in a real situation. Maximum engine reverse thrust for extended time, manual deployment of all available spoilers, and even the parking brake in the final critical meters when our speed had finally reduced to levels that made that technique viable. The aircraft finally came to a complete stop just 200 meters from the runway's end, in a position that allowed us to clearly see the lights marking the end of the asphalt. We were safe, alive, and on solid ground for the first time in over 2 hours that felt like 2 decades. The silence that followed shutting down the engines was absolutely deafening. For several seconds that seemed like eternity. No one in the flight deck moved, no one spoke, no one even breathed audibly. It was as if we were all mentally processing the miraculous fact that we were actually alive, safe, on solid ground, and that we'd managed to bring 165 passengers and 6 crew members back to their families on that night. That could have ended completely differently. "Holy cow, we did it," Mike murmured, his voice loaded with emotion and relief after over 2 hours of constant tension and extreme concentration. "Yes, we did it," I responded, feeling my hands trembling slightly for the first time all night, now that adrenaline was beginning to dissipate, and the reality of what we'd just been through was starting to settle in my mind. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the airport," I announced through the intercom, my voice trembling with emotion for the first time during the entire emergency. "Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened while firefighters conduct mandatory safety verification of the aircraft and clear our exit." The evacuation was conducted in a completely orderly and efficient manner by our experienced cabin crew. Each passenger who descended the firefighters' special stairs was a living, breathing confirmation that we'd made all the correct decisions during the most critical moments of the emergency. No injuries, no significant medical incidents, no cases of panic or hysteria. 165 people would return safely to their families that night, and 6 aviation professionals could continue their careers knowing they'd done exactly what was necessary when everything depended on their competence and experience. Later, during the detailed technical investigation conducted by specialists from the Aviation Accident Investigation Center, we discovered that a fundamental piece of the primary hydraulic system had literally broken due to progressive metal fatigue, an extremely rare event in modern commercial aviation, but statistically not impossible after thousands of flight cycles. Specialized engineers officially told us that our operational decisions throughout the entire emergency sequence were technically correct and appropriate, and that the final result could have been dramatically different if we'd opted for the more distant airport or made any other different decision during the process. In the days and weeks following the incident, I received dozens of messages and letters from passengers who were aboard that night, thanking us for the calm and professional way we handled the emergency. A 67-year-old lady wrote a particularly touching letter, saying she was traveling to see her first grandchild be born, an event she'd anxiously awaited for months, and that thanks to our work and competence, she managed to be present at the most important and emotional moment of her youngest daughter's life. Another passenger, a 45-year-old businessman, told me he was returning from a meeting that could save his small family business from bankruptcy, and that without our professionalism, he never would have had the chance to implement the deal he'd managed to close on that crucial trip. Those personal and moving messages reminded me deeply why I chose this profession so many years ago. It's not just about piloting sophisticated aircraft or meeting rigorously planned flight schedules. It's fundamentally about the sacred responsibility and immense privilege of caring for people who trust their lives in our hands to safely take them to their destinations, to their most important dreams, to their beloved families, to the moments that define their existence. I learned that transformative night that all the technical training in the world, all the simulator hours, all the studied manuals and memorized procedures never completely replace the fundamental human capacity to maintain absolute calm under extreme pressure and make quick, correct decisions based on accumulated experience and solid technical knowledge. I also viscerally discovered that, even in the most extreme and apparently impossible situations, coordinated teamwork and clear, precise communication literally make all the difference between a controlled incident and a tragedy that would mark dozens of families forever. If you haven't subscribed to the Black Box channel yet, do it now to follow more real and impactful stories from commercial aviation, as I always tell my pilot colleagues when I share this experience during our conversations in the intervals between flights. Today, several years after that night that changed my professional perspective, whenever we fly over storm formations or face turbulence of any intensity, my first officers know they can count on me not just for the technical experience accumulated over the years, but because I learned in practice that in the most critical and decisive moments, the difference between life and death often lies in seemingly small details, in careful and meticulous verification of systems before each flight, in precise and clear communication among all crew members, in making decisions always based on objective facts and established procedures, never on emotions or assumptions. That experience also taught me a fundamental lesson about the importance of never, ever underestimating the power and unpredictability of nature. We can have all the most advanced technology in the world at our disposal, sophisticated redundant systems, extensive training and state-of-the-art equipment, but we still critically depend on weather conditions, adequate and preventive maintenance, and mainly on experienced and well-trained human judgment to operate with absolute safety in any situation. I continue flying regularly. I continue deeply loving my profession and feeling privileged to be part of this worldwide community of aviators, but now with even deeper respect and sharper awareness of the tremendous responsibility I carry on my shoulders each time I start the engines of a commercial aircraft. Each takeoff represents a silent but solemn promise to passengers that I'll do absolutely everything within my power, using all my experience, training and dedication to bring them back with total safety to their families' arms. And when younger pilots, full of enthusiasm and dreams, seek me out to ask for advice on how to develop the skills necessary to effectively handle real emergencies, I always share the same fundamental message. Train tirelessly, study constantly, stay always updated with the latest techniques and procedures, but above all, never forget that behind each seat in the passenger cabin is a unique human story, a family that loves that person, a dream waiting to be fulfilled or an important moment waiting to be lived. That deep responsibility should keep us eternally humble and always prepared to face the unexpected with competence and serenity. Sometimes, during the quietest moments of night flights, I wonder, what if that storm had been even more severe and prolonged? What if the hydraulic failure had happened during the critical moments of takeoff, when our options would be much more limited? In aviation, there's always a what-if that constantly reminds us we're perpetually dancing on the thin line between comforting routine and challenging extraordinary circumstances. If this story touched you in some way or sparked your curiosity about the fascinating world of aviation, subscribe to Black Box and share it with anyone else interested in the behind-the-scenes of commercial aviation. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer.